Yo guys, what's going on? My name's Matt and I invest in Pokemon cards. In today's video, I'm going to teach you guys the 5 questions I always ask myself before I buy any Pokemon card. Let's get right into it. The first question I always ask myself is, what makes this card unique? You could be spending that money in your pocket anywhere. You could be spending it in the stock market. You could be going out to dinner. Why does this card deserve your money? What makes it unique compared to the millions of other Pokemon cards? Let's break down this Venusaur EX for a moment, right? Personally, I think it's one of the best artworks in Pokemon. I think it's the best Venusaur artwork in the hobby. Obviously debatable because it's an opinion, even though it is a fact. But an amazing artwork, right? It is Venusaur, an original 151 Pokemon. It's a connected artwork with Bulbasaur and Ivysaur in the Scarlet and Violet 151 set. And it almost seems like the art is like Venusaur is almost causing all of these flowers, right? If you look behind Venusaur, it's not as bright and colorful, but as Venusaur walks forward, it's almost like you just came upon the Venusaur in the forest. And as it walks towards you, all these flowers are starting to bloom, etc. I'm crazy, guys, I know. Don't worry about it. But I absolutely love this artwork. But honestly, that's a lot of the reason why it's so unique. Another quick example that we can go over is this Charizard here, right? I had recently just purchased this card in a PSA 10. Absolutely love it. I had purchased a lot of raw copies of this card last year. And the reason why I did so was not only because it's a Charizard, probably the most popular Pokemon in the hobby. It also has a Sword and Shield Vivid Voltage stamp. It has a yellow border, which is pretty unique, even though that's probably pretty common for a promo. And not only that, it has a really unique hollow foiling on it. When you see the card in person, you'll understand what I mean. And I just love the pose that Charizard's in, and his claws are up, etc. So those are the reasons why I feel like this card is unique and what really drew me to it. The next question I always ask is, do I genuinely love this card? Now, I know all the things that make it unique, but just like I explained in the Venusaur artwork, you kind of get a sense of like how much I love that artwork, right? Do you genuinely love it, or do you love the price tag? I'll say it again. Do you genuinely love the card, or do you love the price tag? I want you to think about it, right? When I first purchased that Venusaur EX, the person at the card shop could have said 300 and I would have given it to them. I purchased the card for $50. I was always someone that had came from Magic the Gathering, so paying $50 for a trading card was not new to me. A lot of cards in Magic the Gathering, especially if they're good, and especially at that time. Now it's a little bit different with the collector boxes, etc. But at that time, $50 for a card, no problem. In Magic, $100, $200 for play sets, sometimes just for one card, if you wanted to make your deck, viable, or if you wanted to use it for your commander deck, etc. So I genuinely love the card, as you can tell, and as I described. This card as well. It's a card I love to look at. Genuinely would have purchased it if it was $5, or probably would have purchased it if it was $500. I would have thought about it a little bit more, but I was in love with the price tag a little bit. You always have to be. But if you love it at $5, you're definitely going to love it at $500. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. So do you genuinely love the card? Always ask yourself that. The third question I always like to ask myself is, will collectors still want this card in 10 years? Right? Now, the reason why I ask you that question and want you to pose that question to yourself is, a lot of Pokemon cards are expensive, but expensive does not mean liquid. Expensive does not mean that you'll be able to sell the card in a day, in an hour, right? At a card show, right? I know there's a lot of cards out there that are worth thousands and thousands of dollars, and I've seen people try to sell the card over months and not be successful, right? There's cards that I've seen that have sat in vendor in their stock for a long time. They're almost trying to give the card away at this point, right? Because they have so much money tied up in that card. Always ask yourself, will I be able? It doesn't have to be 10 years. It could be a year. It could be a month, right? Always think about when you're trying to exit these cards if you want to, right? This Venusaur EX, this copy that I have here, the first one I ever bought, I'm never selling it. But for a lot of cards that I bought as an investment, I always like to ask myself, will I be able to sell this when I want to, in a year, in 2 years, in a month, in 5 years, right? In 10 years, right? Always ask yourself that. It'll make you make decisions that are not as rushed or feel like FOMO, right? Because I feel like a lot of people get into those cards, not because they're not educated about the hobby or about the card, but because it's just something they never saw before, or it excited them, but it doesn't excite other people. etc. So always think about that when purchasing any card within the Pokemon hobby. Another thing I always like to ask myself, and this is a good one, is if this card dropped 50% tomorrow, would you still be happy that you bought it? Now, my first reaction to any card that I invest in, and I know it's a good investment, is I would buy more. If that's not your answer, maybe think about where you're putting your money, right? If this Venusaur EX dropped by 50%, I would be ecstatic. Absolutely ecstatic. I'd be buying multiple copies. I hope it drops by 50%, right? Again, a lot of these cards, this Mega Latias, if it dropped by 50%, I'd be ecstatic. I'd be buying multiple copies, for our $100 a week investing challenge. Love this card. If it dropped by 50%, but keep buying it, right? Always ask yourself these things. Again, this card, I think I bought it when it was around $50 raw. It's now about $95. So if it dropped by 50%, I, come out even. But even if when I bought it at $50 and it dropped to 25, I'd be perfectly okay with that. That's perfectly fine. Now, I want to give you guys an example of where the two kind of don't, well, all these questions don't match up, right? The first question, what makes this card unique, right? Well, this is probably the most unique Mewtwo that you could buy. It reminds me a lot about the Pokemon movie. Mewtwo, if you see this card in person, has one of the coolest holographic patterns that I've ever seen on a Pokemon card. You could see him on your little computer back here. Silver border is awesome on these cards, right? It's just a really awesome card, right? Very rare as well, and very hard to pull. So that's what makes it unique. Do I genuinely love the card? Heck yeah. This card is awesome. I've owned this card. I've sold this card when it ran up, etc. But when I go ahead and I ask myself this next question, let's say I wanted to buy it in a PSA 10. If this card dropped by 50% tomorrow, would I be okay with it? No, I wouldn't be okay with it. I'd probably feel really bad about it. I've definitely been in that situation. I've been invested in the stock market and other things for, a really long time, about 15 years total. And within that time, I've made some bad investments and I've definitely learned from it. But I've been there when I've lost 50% of an investment, etc. And I know the feeling that brings. So always ask yourself that, right? I'd feel much more comfortable if I bought this in a 9. I still get to look at the card. I still get to admire it. I still get to get or gain some of the appreciation that the card may have going up in price over time just because of how rare it is. But I'd feel much more comfortable losing $850 compared to $5,000, right? That's why I like to ask myself this question. And it's so funny. A lot of people that I introduce into the hobby, there's always you show them a PSA 9 and they're like, why would I want a 9? Right? I think as you become more involved in the hobby, as you're around it more, you start liking 9s, right? A 9 was always supposed to be worth more than raw. And we're kind of trying to see that now in the Pokemon hobby. I think when you first join the hobby, it's PSA 10, PSA 10, PSA 10, PSA 10. And then you start realizing there's a lot of value within PSA 9s. And you could still own this card in a PSA 9 for a lot less than a PSA 10. And you still make, a lot of money considering what card this is, right? So always think about that. Always think about what you're willing to lose. Never invest more than you're willing to lose. I think there's a lot of people in the Pokemon hobby that are way over leveraged, right? And they're so worried about a bubble pop because they have so much invested. But I always want you guys to be thinking about that. The purpose of my channel is I'll tell you sometimes what to invest in. That's not really where, I get a lot of joy out of YouTube. For me, it's teaching people how to think about these things, right? Before they just make a stupid decision, buy this card for $10,000 and then potentially lose a couple $1,000 because, bubble pops or market goes the other way. Nobody knows, right? Nobody knows. So the purpose of my channel is always to try to get you to think about these things. There's a lot of people out there that just go buy. And then you'll see a lot of, shorts out there that are like, oh my God, the bubble's popping. And you just kind of don't know, what the heck is kind of going on. I think a lot of what's going on right now is cyclical. I don't think the bubble is going to pop. I actually think we're going to get another, kind of euphoric golden age, I guess you can say, with the 30th. But I always want you guys to just think about these things and think for yourself and become immune to all the noise out there of the bubbles popping, buy, buy, buy. Always think in this hobby, right? Because if you don't, you can go ahead and waste a lot of money on things that you don't actually want. The fifth question, I think, you can get lost in this fifth question. It's probably where a lot of you are going to spend the most time, and it's probably where I've spent the most time. And that is, am I paying a fair price? And there's a lot that kind of goes into that question. And it kind of takes just being in the hobby, watching YouTube videos, etc., of people that are frankly better at this than myself. And just kind of, thinking how, they kind of think, kind of stealing some things from them, using your own logic, etc. Now, this Venusaur EX is a great example, right? So you really want to buy genuinely when prices are consolidating, right? When you get this run up and you feel this FOMO, when things just go vertical, just absolutely vertical on you, that's when you kind of want to just take a step back for a second, say, I wasn't on this boat. First of all, there's many other boats that are coming, right? There's always new sets. There's always new cards. I'm constantly discovering cards that I didn't know existed, right? There's just millions and millions of cards, right? So you missed this boat, but you didn't miss every boat, right? That's the way you have to think of it when you see a card spike like you on this, because it's happened to me and it will happen to you. But don't make a brash decision and just invest in the card at $156. Wait a little bit. I've seen this for cards that are $3,000, cards that are $5,000, cards that are $5, cards that are $5,000 as well. But think about it. It just went vertical on me. It's $152. Let's wait a month or two, right? And if you would have done that, you could see it went down to $120 again, right? It found its floor again. Now, I do think this is a card that is really good to invest in at this price. I think it's found its floor. The card just announced that this card is no longer obviously going to be printed. Scarlet and Violet 151 is not going to be printed anymore. That goes into all of it. You could also look here, right? People are selling this card for $114.99 with shipping, $116, right around that $120 mark. You can go here, view more data. Just take a quick peek at this. Oh, $119, $114, $127, $139, $109, $113, right? So if it fell, it probably wouldn't fall that much more. The market is comfortable paying this price for this card. So you should too as well. When you go to a card show, try to get it for a little bit less. That way you have a little bit of a cushion, etc. So I think a fair price for this card is where it's at, probably a little bit lower. I'd try to get it for 110, under 110 if I can. You can definitely get a lot of great steals on eBay. Always think about that. Always look at potentially buying a PSA 8 and cracking it out and selling it raw. There's a lot of value to be found there. Some people frown at that. Not necessarily. Don't hate the player, hate the game. There's a lot of ways to look at it. I think there becomes a different question of, am I paying a fair price when you're looking at raw versus graded? And I think that this could be a video in and of itself. This video is more supposed to be for raw cards. If you want me to go into my thinking about how I like to think about graded cards, I'd be happy to do a video on that. Let me know in the comment section down below. Again, guys, these are my 5 questions. Do I genuinely love this card? What makes this card special? Am I paying a fair price? Will collectors still want this card in 10 years, 1 year, 1 month, whenever you'd like to sell? And if this card dropped by 50% tomorrow, would I be happy if I still bought it? Think about it. I'll see you guys later. Peace.